The seamstress married a grieving stranger. Never knowing he was the Duke all England mourned. The gaslight trembled upon the seamstress's needle as whispers travelled like poison through the village hall. A widow without a name, someone murmured behind a gloved hand. Maribel Lorne kept her eyes downcast, the crimson ribbon at her wrist the only colour in her modest brown gown. Fans snapped shut around her like judgments rendered. She married him with not a soul as witness, Lady Corvina Estmere pronounced, her voice cutting through the silence that had fallen. A man who appeared from the sea itself, and she took him without question of lineage or letter. The assembly stilled. Even the ancient clock ceased its pendulum swing, as if time itself paused to witness her humiliation. Maribel's fingers tightened around her sewing basket. 6 months of marriage to Alden had brought her nothing but the cruel speculation of Fernwick village. They knew nothing of the tenderness with which he stoked the fire on cold mornings, nor how his eyes held storms she could not name, but longed to calm. What woman weds a stranger in mourning? Lady Corvina's laugh was brittle as ice forming over a winter pond. One might question whether she trapped him in his grief, unable to discern virtue from desperation. The crimson ribbon at Maribel's wrist, her mother's last gift, seemed to burn against her skin. She had stitched her hopes into every mended garment, sewn her dreams into each careful seam. Now her reputation unravelled thread by thread before these witnesses. Might one inquire, came a low voice from the doorway, what virtue looks like upon the tongues of those who would slander a woman in her absence? The assembly turned as one. Captain Branswick Hart stood in uniform at the threshold, his scarred face solemn as judgment. Behind him, soldiers bearing the royal insignia of Evermere formed a silent wall of brass buttons and disciplined posture. Lady Corvina's fan stilled. Captain Hart, what business brings the Royal Guard to our humble village? The captain's gaze swept across the assembly, settling briefly on Maribel's pale face. We come by royal decree, seeking a man this village has harboured unknowingly. Maribel felt her breath catch. Alden had spoken of no past beyond his grief, of no home beyond the sea. What decree could possibly touch their humble cottage? What man? Someone dared ask. Captain Hart removed his hat, revealing the insignia of the royal household upon his collar. The Duke of Evermere. A gasp travelled through the hall like wind before storm. The Duke of Evermere, lost at sea when the royal vessel sank nearly a year past. All England had worn black ribbons in memorial. The palace had flown its flags at half-mast for 40 days. You are mistaken, Maribel found herself saying, her voice steadier than she felt. There is no duke here, only simple folk and simpler lives. The captain's eyes held neither malice nor mockery, only a curious compassion. And what of your husband, Mrs. Lorne, the man who arrived from nowhere, bearing grief too profound for explanation? The crimson ribbon seemed to tighten around her wrist. The room spun like thread unwinding from a spool. Pray, speak plainly, she whispered. The Duke was found alive, madam, but refused to return to his duties. He fled from his title, his heritage, his responsibilities. Captain Hart paused, his voice lowering. And from the tragedy that claimed his young wife and child at sea, Maribel felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The sewing basket slipped from her grasp, thimbles and spools scattering across the wooden floor like the pieces of her fractured understanding. This is absurd, Lady Corvina declared, though her voice trembled. A duke would never take shelter in a seamstress's cottage, much less what, my lady? Captain Hart challenged. Much less find solace in honest hands, in a heart untainted by ambition? The assembly seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind rose from the sea, carrying the first drops of rain. Somewhere, Alden, or whoever he truly was, walked the shore alone, unaware that his carefully constructed peace was about to shatter. I must speak with my husband, Maribel said, gathering her scattered possessions with trembling hands. The crown cannot wait, Mrs. Lorne, Captain Hart replied. England has mourned his grace for too long. It is time he returned to his rightful place. The crimson ribbon came loose, falling to the floor like a portent. Before she could retrieve it, Captain Hart bent and carefully lifted the simple band, offering it to her with the deference one might show a queen. His Grace must return with us on the morrow, he said quietly. The question that remains, madam, is whether you shall accompany him. The rain fell in mournful sheets as Maribel raced along the coastal path, her shawl providing little protection against the tempest. Her thoughts whirled faster than the storm. Alden, a duke, the quiet man who mended their cottage roof with calloused hands, who woke sometimes in the night calling names she did not recognize. The cottage came into view, its single window glowing warm against the gathering darkness. Through the glass she could see him, the silhouette of the man she had married beneath no witness but the indifferent sea. He sat before the hearth, his head bowed as if in prayer or penitence. She hesitated at the threshold of her own home, suddenly a stranger to what lay within. The door creaked open before she could find her courage. "Maribel." Alden stood framed in lamplight, concern etched upon his features. "You're soaked through. Come inside before you catch your death." Death. The word echoed strangely now. Had he not been pronounced dead by all England? Had she not unwittingly married a ghost? She stepped past him, feeling the warmth of the fire reach for her like beseeching hands. Water dripped from her skirts onto the floor he had swept that very morning. "The royal guard is in the village," she said, her back to him. "They seek the Duke of Evermere." The silence that followed was confirmation enough. When she turned, his face had drained of color, his eyes wide with the horror of discovery. "How long have they been here?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Not how long," she whispered. "But why? Why would the Duke of Evermere hide himself in a seamstress's cottage? Why would he vow himself to a woman of no consequence when all England mourns him?" Alden, or whoever he truly was, sank into the chair by the fire, his shoulders bowed beneath an invisible weight. "Because Cassian Greymorn, Duke of Evermere, died on that ship. Whatever washed ashore was merely the shell of a man who had failed to protect what mattered most." "Your wife," Maribel said, the words like ash on her tongue. "Your child." He closed his eyes, lines of anguish deepening around his mouth. "Elaine and our son, Thomas. The waves took them while I watched, helpless. What right had I to survive when they did not? What right to bear a title that promised protection I could not provide?" Outside, the storm gathered force, waves crashing against the shore like grief against reason. Inside, the cottage that had sheltered their quiet marriage seemed suddenly too small to contain the truth between them. "So you came here," Maribel continued, "to this forgotten corner of the coast. You let England believe you dead, while you—" Her voice broke. "While you used me as shelter from your ghosts." "No," he said, rising suddenly. "Maribel, no. What began as escape became—" "Became what?" she demanded, backing away from his outstretched hand. "A convenient lie? A temporary comfort before you inevitably return to your real life?" "Became the only truth I have known since the sea took everything," he answered, his voice raw. "Maribel, I never intended—" "Intent matters little against such deception," she said, wrapping her damp shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You let me build a life upon foundations of sand, Your Grace." The title hung between them, sharp as accusation. His face twisted as if she had struck him. "Do not call me that," he pleaded. "Not from your lips. Then what shall I call the stranger before me? For you are not the Alden Greymorn I married." Maribel fought to keep her voice steady. "The Royal Guard comes tomorrow to reclaim their Duke." Captain Hart was most insistent. A bitter laugh escaped him. "Branswick Hart. Of course they would send him. The captain values duty above all earthly comforts." "He offered me a choice," Maribel said, "to accompany you when you return." Hope and dread warred in his expression. "And what will you choose?" The question hung suspended in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Outside, the storm howled its fury, mirroring the tempest in her heart. "How can I choose when I do not even know who you are?" she whispered. "The man I married exists no more than the wife and child you lost. We are but ghosts, Your Grace, haunting the edges of each other's lives." "I am the same man who held you through winter nights," he said, taking a hesitant step toward her. "The same who watched in wonder as you transformed simple cloth into garments of dignity and grace. My title changes nothing of what has grown between us." "It changes everything," Maribel countered, retrieving her sewing basket from the table. "A duke cannot hide forever in a seamstress's cottage. England calls you home." "England is not home," he said fiercely. "This cottage, these walls that have witnessed our quiet days, this is home." Maribel's fingers found the empty space at her wrist where the crimson ribbon had been. "Captain Hart has my ribbon. It fell in the village hall." His eyes softened with unexpected tenderness. "I shall retrieve it for you." "No need," she said. "I have thread enough to make another." But they both knew it was a lie. That ribbon, her mother's last gift, was irreplaceable, much like the simple happiness they had found in their false beginning. "The soldiers will come at dawn," she said, moving toward the small bedroom they had shared these 6 months past. "You should prepare to resume your proper place in the world, Your Grace." "Maribel," he called as she reached the door, "will you go with me?" She paused, one hand on the rough-hewn frame. "I do not belong in your world." "You belong with me," he said. "Dukedom or cottage, title or none. If there is anything true in this deception, it is that." Maribel closed the door between them without reply, leaning against it as tears finally broke free. Beyond the walls of their cottage, the storm raged on, indifferent to the human hearts breaking within. Dawn crept hesitantly over the horizon, as if reluctant to witness what the morning would bring. Maribel had not slept. She had spent the night hours stitching by candlelight, not garments for others, but a single small pouch to carry what few treasures she could claim as truly hers. In the main room, she found him standing at the window, watching the approaching riders with the resigned dignity of a man facing execution. He had dressed in the simple clothes of Alden Greymorn, village widower, though they hung upon him differently now. Knowing what lay beneath the disguise transformed even the set of his shoulders into something unmistakably aristocratic. "You did not sleep," he observed without turning. "Nor did you," she replied. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, heralding the inevitable. "Have you decided what to tell them?" "The truth," he said, finally facing her. In the pale morning light, his features seemed carved from stone, beautiful and remote. "That I am prepared to resume my duties, but not to relinquish my marriage." Her breath caught. "You cannot mean to acknowledge—" "I mean to honor the vows I made to you," he interrupted, crossing to where she stood. Whether as Alden or Cassian, as commoner or duke, those vows were real. The crimson ribbon lay upon the rough wooden table between them, somehow retrieved during the night, while she had secluded herself in grief and confusion. "The world will say I tricked you," she whispered, "that I ensnared a nobleman in his moment of weakness. Then let them witness how willingly I remain ensnared." He lifted the ribbon, offering it to her with a hand that did not tremble. "Maribel, I have lived half a life these past months, neither fully dead nor truly living. But in your presence I remembered what it meant to breathe without pain." A sharp knock interrupted his words. Captain Hart's voice carried through the wooden door. "Your Grace, the carriage awaits." Maribel took the ribbon from his outstretched hand, their fingers brushing. "They come for their duke." "They may have the duke," he said softly, "but Cassian Greymorn belongs first to his wife, if she will still claim him." Before she could answer, the door opened. Captain Hart entered, followed by two uniformed soldiers. The captain's gaze moved between them, sensing the tension with a soldier's instinct for dangerous terrain. "Your Grace," he said, bowing formally, "the Privy Council awaits your return with great anticipation." "And I shall not disappoint them," Cassian replied, his voice suddenly carrying the unmistakable tenor of command. "But first, Captain, you will bear witness to a truth that must be established before all else." The captain straightened, wary but attentive. "Of course, Your Grace." Cassian turned to Maribel, taking both her hands in his. "Before these men as witnesses, I reaffirm my vows to you, Maribel Lorne Greymorn, not as a duke to a commoner, but as a man who found salvation in your quiet strength. Whatever title I bear, whatever duty I must fulfill, you are and shall remain my Duchess in both name and heart." Maribel felt the world narrow to the warm pressure of his hands around hers, to the earnest truth in eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Behind them, she heard Captain Hart's sharp intake of breath. "Your Grace," the captain ventured cautiously, "perhaps this discussion might be better conducted at Evermere House after you have resumed your proper place." "My proper place is beside my wife," Cassian interrupted, without looking away from Maribel's face. "Whether she accompanies me to London or I remain here in exile." The cottage fell silent, save for the distant cry of gulls. Maribel looked past Cassian to the open door, to the carriage with its gleaming royal crest. Beyond it lay a world she had never known, a world of titles and protocol, of scrutiny and judgment, a world where a seamstress could never belong. "I cannot be a duchess," she whispered. "I know nothing of your world." "Then I shall teach you," he replied. "As you taught me to live again." Captain Hart cleared his throat. "We must depart within the hour, Your Grace. The tide waits for no man, duke or otherwise." "Then we require a moment of privacy, Captain," Cassian said, his tone brooking no argument. "Wait with your men outside." When they were alone once more, Cassian cupped Maribel's face between his hands. "I deceived you about my name, my title, my past. For that, I can only beg your forgiveness. But I have never deceived you about what grew between us. That at least was honest." The crimson ribbon dangled from her fingers, swaying gently in the morning breeze from the open door. "I married a grieving stranger who needed shelter," she said softly. I did not marry a duke. Then forget the duke, he urged. See only the man before you now, the same who has shared your table, your hearth, your life these 6 months past. That man loves you, Maribel, title or none. She closed her eyes, feeling tears gather beneath her lashes. When she opened them again, resolution had hardened within her like steel being forged. I will go with you, she said at last, not as your Duchess, but as your wife. If your England can accept that distinction, perhaps there is hope for us both. Relief transformed his features, years of grief lifting momentarily from his brow. He pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of such intimate gratitude that it nearly undid her resolve. England will accept whatever I decree, he murmured, but your approval is the only sanction I truly require. Maribel stepped back, tying the crimson ribbon around her wrist, with hands that had grown steady once more. Then let us meet this future together, husband, for better or for worse as we vowed. Outside, the carriage horses stamped impatiently, eager to begin the journey that would transform a hidden cottage into legend, a seamstress into nobility. As Maribel gathered her small pouch of belongings, she cast one last glance at the humble space that had sheltered their beginning. Are you certain? Cassian asked, offering his arm in a gesture that suddenly seemed both foreign and familiar. No, she answered honestly, but certainty is a luxury neither of us can afford now. They stepped together into the morning light, where Captain Hart and his men waited with barely concealed astonishment. The captain's eyes widened at the sight of their linked arms, but he wisely held his tongue. Captain Hart, Cassian said, his voice carrying the weight of generations of command, you may inform the Privy Council that the Duke of Evermere returns, with his Duchess. The carriage rolled through the countryside like a ship upon uncertain waters. Maribel sat across from her husband, her duke, her stranger, watching the familiar coastline recede behind them. Captain Hart rode alongside, his scarred face impassive as they passed through villages where people stopped to stare at the royal crest emblazoned on the carriage door. They will have prepared rooms at Evermere House, Cassian said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since their departure. It has been empty these many months, save for the staff who maintained it in my absence. A house with staff, Maribel murmured, her fingers tracing the crimson ribbon at her wrist. I know nothing of managing servants. They manage themselves for the most part, he replied with the casual assurance of nobility. Then, seeing her discomfort, he added more gently, Mrs. Havelock, the housekeeper, will guide you. She has served Evermere for 30 years and knows its rhythms better than I. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jostling them. Instinctively, Cassian reached out to steady her, his hand warm against her arm. The touch, so familiar yet suddenly weighted with new significance, lingered between them. Will they accept me? She asked, voicing the fear that had been growing with each mile that carried them toward London. Your people, your peers, will they welcome a seamstress as their Duchess? His jaw tightened. They will accept what I decree. Decree is not the same as welcome, Maribel countered. I have no illusions about how the aristocracy views those who work with their hands. Then they shall learn a new perspective, he said with quiet authority. You are not merely a seamstress, Maribel. You are the woman who restored a broken man when all of England could not. She turned her gaze to the passing landscape, rolling hills giving way to more populated areas, small cottages yielding to grander estates. I restored Alden Greymorn, she said softly. I know nothing of the Duke of Evermere. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. We are one and the same, though I had forgotten until you reminded me of the man beneath the title. The carriage slowed as they approached a village larger than Fernwick. People gathered along the roadside, pointing and whispering as the royal insignia passed. Captain Hart rode closer to the window. Word has spread of your Grace's return, he reported. I fear we may encounter crowds as we progress. Then let them see, Cassian replied. Let them witness that the Duke of Evermere lives. And his Duchess? Maribel asked, anxiety clutching at her throat. What will they see when they look at me? His eyes softened. They will see what I see, a woman of quiet dignity and uncommon courage. The carriage rolled to a stop in the village square, where a crowd had indeed gathered. Captain Hart dismounted, approaching the carriage door with clear reluctance. They are calling for you, Your Grace, he said. They wish to see with their own eyes. Cassian's hand tightened around Maribel's. Are you prepared for this? She was not. Nothing in her life as a village seamstress had prepared her for the scrutiny of strangers, for the weight of a title she had never sought. Yet something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the ducal assurance, gave her strength. Together, she said, echoing their earlier vow. He nodded once, then released her hand to open the carriage door himself, forestalling Captain Hart's assistance. The crowd's murmur swelled as he stepped down, his simple clothes at odds with the unmistakable bearing of nobility. Then he turned, offering his hand to Maribel. She hesitated only a moment before placing her fingers in his. The sunlight struck her crimson ribbon as she descended, a flash of colour against her modest brown gown. A hush fell over the assembled villagers. "His Grace returns," someone whispered, the words rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. "And who is she?" came another voice, less reverent. Cassian's hand moved to the small of her back, steadying her as surely as he had steadied the roof of their cottage in winter storms. "My good people," he addressed the crowd, his voice carrying without effort. "England has mourned me these many months past. I stand before you now to assure you that the Duke of Evermere lives, and does not stand alone." The crowd's attention shifted to Maribel, curious eyes assessing her simple attire, her work-worn hands, the crimson ribbon that marked her as something other than aristocracy. "I present to you Her Grace, the Duchess of Evermere," Cassian continued, his tone daring any to challenge the declaration. "My wife and companion to whom I owe my restoration." Silence greeted his words, a silence so profound that Maribel could hear the distant church bells marking the hour. Then, from the back of the crowd, a woman stepped forward, her grey hair bound beneath a modest cap. "We lost our Duke to the sea," the woman said, her weathered face solemn. "By what miracle do you return to us, and with a bride unknown to society?" Cassian's posture remained steady, though Maribel felt the tension in him. "The sea takes, and sometimes it returns," he replied. "I washed ashore, broken in body and spirit. This woman," his voice softened as he glanced at Maribel, "mended what was torn. That is miracle enough for any man, title or none." The old woman's eyes narrowed, assessing Maribel with the penetrating gaze of one who has seen too much to be easily deceived. "And you, miss, did you know you were marrying England's lost duke?" All eyes turned to Maribel. In that moment, she understood that her answer would echo far beyond this village square, would follow them to London and the halls of power where her fate would ultimately be decided. "I married a man who needed harbour," she said, her voice clear, despite her racing heart. "I knew nothing of dukes or titles or England's grief. I knew only that before me stood a man of honour whose heart called to mine across the silence of his sorrow." A murmur ran through the crowd, not hostile, but wondering. The old woman's face softened almost imperceptibly. "Honour comes in many guises," she said, as if pronouncing judgment. "Perhaps England has gained more than it lost." Captain Hart stepped forward then, his military bearing creating space in the crowd. "The Duke and Duchess must continue their journey," he announced. "London awaits their return." As they settled back into the carriage, Maribel's hands trembled in her lap. "That was merely the first test," she whispered. "What will happen when we face the Privy Council, the court, your peers? We will face them as we face that crowd," Cassian replied, his gaze holding hers across the carriage. "With truth as our shield and our vows as our strength." The countryside continued to unfurl beyond the window, each turn of the wheels bringing them closer to the London that awaited its returned Duke. As afternoon faded toward evening, Maribel's thoughts turned to their cottage by the sea, to the simple life they had shared, to the uncomplicated joy they had found in each other's company. "Tell me of Evermere House," she said suddenly, needing to break the weight of memory. "What should I prepare myself to encounter?" His face lightened somewhat. "It has stood for 400 years, stone by stone, generation by generation. The east wing catches the morning sun across the rose garden. The library holds volumes collected by Greymourn dukes since the time of Elizabeth. It sounds magnificent," she said, trying to imagine such grandeur. "It is merely a house," he replied, "as our cottage was merely a cottage. What matters are the hearts that dwell within." Night was falling as the carriage finally approached the outskirts of London. Lamps were being lit along the broader streets, glowing like earthbound stars against the gathering darkness. Maribel pressed her face to the window, taking in the unprecedented sight of a city larger than any she had imagined. "Tomorrow," Cassian said, watching her wonder with a ghost of a smile. "Tomorrow we enter Evermere House, and you take your place as its Duchess." She turned to him, fear and determination warring in her heart. "And if I falter?" He reached across the carriage once more, his fingers finding hers in the dimming light. "Then I shall steady you as you once steadied me when the nightmares came." In that promise lay the only certainty Maribel could claim, in a world turned suddenly foreign, that whatever awaited them in London, they would face it not as Duke and Seamstress, but as two souls bound by vows that transcended station and circumstance. Evermere House rose before them like a vision from another world, stately limestone gleaming in the morning light, windows catching the sun like diamonds, an iron gate bearing the grey morn crest standing open in expectation of their arrival. Maribel's breath caught in her throat as the carriage passed beneath the arch, wheels crunching on the immaculate gravel of the circular drive. "We are home," Cassian said quietly, though the tightness in his jaw belied the simple declaration. This was his ancestral seat, the physical manifestation of the title he had fled, and the place where he had last embraced his first wife and child before their fatal journey. The carriage came to a halt before broad stone steps. Servants lined the entrance, their faces composed into careful neutrality despite the extraordinary circumstances of their master's return. At their head stood a woman of perhaps 60, straight-backed as a queen, her grey hair swept into a severe knot beneath a black cap. "Mrs. Havelock," Cassian murmured, "the housekeeper I mentioned." The carriage door opened, and Captain Hart offered his hand. "Your Grace, may I present Evermere House and its staff awaiting your return?" Cassian descended first, his bearing transforming subtly as his boots touched the gravel of his ancestral home. He stood straighter, his chin lifting almost imperceptibly, the mantle of dukedom settling upon his shoulders like a cloak, long set aside but never forgotten. When he turned to offer his hand to Maribel, his eyes held both warning and encouragement. This moment, her first appearance before the household, would set the tone for all that followed. Maribel placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses they both bore from their months of simple living. Her other hand instinctively touched the crimson ribbon at her wrist, drawing strength from its familiar texture. As she emerged from the carriage, her plain brown travelling dress a stark contrast to the grandeur surrounding her, she lifted her chin in unconscious echo of her husband's posture. Mrs. Havelock stepped forward, executing a perfect curtsy. "Your Grace," she addressed Cassian, her voice betraying no hint of the shock she must surely feel at his miraculous return. "Evermere House welcomes you home." "Thank you, Mrs. Havelock," Cassian replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority that Maribel was still reconciling with the man who had mended their cottage roof. "May I present Her Grace, the Duchess of Evermere, my wife?" A barely perceptible ripple passed through the assembled staff. Mrs. Havelock's composure wavered for only a moment before she recovered, turning to Maribel with another precise curtsy. "Your Grace, we are honoured to welcome you to Evermere House." Maribel inclined her head, remembering the way Lady Corvina had once acknowledged a curtsy from a shopkeeper. "Thank you, Mrs. Havelock. I look forward to becoming acquainted with Evermere and its household." If the housekeeper was surprised by the commoner's perfect composure, she revealed nothing. "Of course, Your Grace. The blue suite has been prepared for your accommodation." Cassian's hand tightened slightly around Maribel's. "The Duchess will reside in the ducal suite, Mrs. Havelock. We shall require no separate accommodations." This pronouncement did cause a visible reaction, a slight widening of the housekeeper's eyes, a murmur quickly suppressed among the footmen. The ducal suite, Maribel understood instinctively, had been shared with his first wife. "As you wish, Your Grace," Mrs. Havelock replied after a moment. "I shall see to the arrangements immediately." They proceeded up the steps, Maribel's hand resting lightly on Cassian's arm. The entrance hall opened before them, a soaring space of marble and mahogany, gilt-framed portraits of stern-faced grey-morn ancestors lining the walls. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister polished to a mirror shine. "The family portraits," Cassian murmured, following her gaze to the paintings. 20 generations of grey-morn dukes and their duchesses. Maribel's steps faltered as they passed beneath the scrutiny of his ancestors. Would her portrait someday join theirs, a simple seamstress elevated beyond all expectation or preparation? The thought sent a tremor through her that Cassian felt through their linked arms. "They are merely oil and canvas," he said quietly. "You are flesh and blood, and far braver than any of them." Before she could respond, a door opened at the far end of the hall. A man emerged, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in clothes that even Maribel's inexperienced eye recognized as the height of fashion and expense. "Lord Harrington," Captain Hart announced, stepping forward. "The Duke has returned, as you see." Lord Harrington approached with measured steps, his hawkish face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "So I observe, Captain. Most unexpected." "Uncle," Cassian greeted him with a formality Maribel had never witnessed. "I trust you have managed the estate affairs adequately in my absence." "I have maintained what you abandoned," Lord Harrington replied, his gaze sliding to Maribel with undisguised assessment. "Though I see you return with additions not accounted for in the succession." The air between the men crackled with tension. Maribel understood immediately that this silver-haired aristocrat had not mourned Cassian's loss, had perhaps even celebrated the opportunity to manage the vast Evermere holdings in his nephew's absence. "May I present Her Grace, Maribel Greymorn, Duchess of Evermere," Cassian said, his tone brooking no challenge. "My wife, whom I had the good fortune to meet during my recovery." Lord Harrington made no move to bow or acknowledge her title. A most fortuitous meeting, it would seem. One wonders at such providence. A duke believed dead and a woman of exceptional character, Cassian finished for him, steel underlying his words, who restored what the sea had broken. Maribel met Lord Harrington's cold scrutiny without flinching. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, my lord," she said, her seamstress's hands steady despite the hostility directed at her. "I look forward to understanding more of the Evermere legacy that my husband holds so dear." Something flickered in the older man's eyes, surprise perhaps at her composed response. "Indeed, we shall have much to discuss, I'm sure." He turned back to Cassian. "The Privy Council has requested your immediate appearance. They were most insistent upon receiving word of your return." "They shall wait another day," Cassian replied. "My wife requires rest after our journey, and I will not leave her alone on her first night at Evermere." Lord Harrington's lips thinned. "The crown does not wait on the convenience of its subjects, nephew, even those who wear coronets." "Then the crown shall learn patience," Cassian said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Captain Hart may convey my respects and assure them of my appearance tomorrow." The captain nodded, clearly relieved to have a reason to exit the charged atmosphere. With a formal bow, he retreated, leaving Maribel alone with her husband and his clearly disapproving uncle. "Mrs. Havelock will show you to your chambers," Lord Harrington said, conceding the immediate battle while his eyes promised further confrontation. "I shall await you in the library, Cassian. There are matters requiring urgent attention." As the older man strode away, Maribel felt her shoulders sag slightly with the release of tension. "He despises me already," she whispered. "He despises any impediment to his ambitions," Cassian corrected, guiding her toward the staircase where Mrs. Havelock awaited. "You represent the failure of his hopes to control Evermere indefinitely." They followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase, passing through corridors lined with artwork and furnishings more valuable than everything in Fernwick Village combined. Maribel felt increasingly displaced, a thread of common cotton woven inexplicably into silk brocade. Mrs. Havelock paused before double doors of carved mahogany. "The ducal suite, your graces," she announced, opening the doors to reveal a series of interconnected rooms more spacious than Maribel's entire cottage. A sitting room furnished in shades of deep green and gold opened onto a bedchamber dominated by a massive four-poster bed. Beyond, Maribel glimpsed a dressing room larger than her former kitchen. "Thank you, Mrs. Havelock," Cassian said. "Would you arrange for tea to be brought up, and perhaps some light refreshment for the Duchess?" "Of course, your grace." The housekeeper hesitated, then added with careful neutrality, "Shall I send up the Duchess's lady's maid to assist with her unpacking?" Maribel tensed, suddenly aware of her lack of luggage, of proper attire, of any of the trappings expected of a duchess. "Not yet," Cassian answered smoothly. "Her Grace's personal staff will be arranged tomorrow. For tonight we require only privacy and rest." When the housekeeper had departed, closing the doors behind her, Maribel moved to the window overlooking the immaculate gardens below. "I have no unpacking to do," she said softly. "No proper clothes, no lady's maid, no understanding of what is expected of me." Cassian came to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers in the leaded glass. "Tomorrow, I shall send for the finest modiste in London. You will have gowns befitting your station." "Gowns will not make me a duchess," she replied, turning to face him. In the familiar lines of his face she sought the man she had married, the quiet widower who had shared her simple table, who had held her through winter nights. The finest silks cannot disguise a seamstress's hands. He took those hands in his, turning them palms upward to reveal the calluses, the tiny scars from countless needles. "These hands saved me," he said, his voice low with emotion. "I will not have you ashamed of them." "It is not shame I feel," Maribel corrected, "but fear. Your uncle looked at me as one might regard an insect. How many more will look at me thus? How many will question your judgment, your sanity, for elevating a village seamstress to duchess?" "Let them question," Cassian said fiercely. "I questioned nothing when I placed my heart in your keeping." The morning dawned with a clarity that seemed ill-suited to Maribel's inner turmoil. She stood before the mirror in the Duchess's dressing room, confronting her reflection with the critical eye she had once turned upon her finest stitches. The gown she wore, hastily altered by a maid with some skill, had belonged to Cassian's first wife. The silk rustled strangely against her skin, accustomed as she was to homespun cotton and simple wool. "You need not wear it if it troubles you," Cassian said from the doorway, already dressed for his audience with the Privy Council. He cut an imposing figure in formal attire, somber black relieved only by the gleaming silver buttons bearing the grey-morn crest. "I have nothing else suitable," she replied, her fingers tracing the crimson ribbon she had woven into her hair, the one element of her former life she refused to relinquish. "And I would not shame you before the council." He crossed to her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "You could never shame me, Maribel. It is I who fears shaming you with the scrutiny my return will bring." A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Havelock entered with the proper deference, though her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the new Duchess in her predecessor's gown. "Your Graces, forgive the intrusion. The modiste has arrived as requested, and Lord Harrington awaits in the library to accompany His Grace to Westminster." "Thank you, Mrs. Havelock. Please show Madame Laurent to the blue drawing-room. The Duchess will attend her shortly." As the housekeeper withdrew, Cassian turned to Maribel. "She is the finest in London. She will create a wardrobe worthy of your position." "Can she create the knowledge I lack?" Maribel asked, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the borrowed silk. "The history of your family, the protocol of court, the 1,000 invisible rules that separate nobility from commoners? For those," Cassian said with unexpected warmth, "I have arranged a different tutor." He crossed to the door, opening it to reveal a small white-haired woman whose wrinkled face was illuminated by bright, intelligent eyes. "Your Grace," the woman said, curtsying with surprising grace for one of her advanced years, "it is a blessing beyond measure to see you return to us." "Maribel," Cassian said, "may I present Lady Agatha Pembroke, my godmother and the wisest woman in London society." Lady Agatha entered the room, her assessing gaze taking in Maribel from head to toe, without a hint of the disdain Lord Harrington had displayed. "So this is the brave soul who has captured our wandering duke," she said, her voice warm with genuine interest. "Come closer, child, and let me see you properly. My eyes are not what they once were." Maribel approached hesitantly, conscious of her borrowed finery and provincial manners. Lady Agatha murmured, circling her slowly. "Excellent posture, clear eyes, a certain dignity that cannot be taught." She stopped before Maribel, reaching up to touch the crimson ribbon woven through dark hair. "And this? A token of significance, I imagine." "My mother's," Maribel answered simply. "All I have left of her." Lady Agatha nodded as if confirming a private assessment. "Very good. Sentiment without sentimentality. You'll do nicely, I think." Cassian's relief was palpable. "Then I leave her in your capable hands, godmother." Lord Harrington grows impatient, and the Privy Council awaits. "Let them wait," Lady Agatha said dismissively. "They've done little enough these past months but squabble over your presumed death. A few more minutes will hardly signify." Despite her anxiety, Maribel found herself warming to the older woman's irreverent spirit. Cassian smiled for the first time since they had entered Evermere House, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and reminded her of quiet evenings by their cottage hearth. "I must go," he said, crossing to Maribel and taking her hands in his. "Lady Agatha will guide you through the essentials of your new position, and Madame Laurent will ensure you are properly attired for tomorrow's presentation at court." "Court?" Maribel echoed, fresh panic rising. "So soon?" "The Queen has expressed particular interest in meeting the woman who restored her lost duke," he explained. "It is an honor that cannot be declined." "An honor indeed," Lady Agatha interjected dryly, though one might call it royal curiosity rather than royal favor at this juncture. Cassian shot his godmother a warning glance before turning back to Maribel. "Trust Lady Agatha. She has navigated the shoals of society longer than either of us has lived, and she will not lead you astray." With that, he pressed a brief kiss to Maribel's forehead, a gesture of such casual intimacy that it startled her in these grand surroundings, and departed to face his own ordeal before the Privy Council. When the door closed behind him, Maribel found herself alone with her unexpected mentor. Lady Agatha settled herself in a nearby chair, arranging her skirts with the unconscious grace of lifelong breeding. "Now then," the older woman said, gesturing for Maribel to sit opposite her, "let us dispense with pretense. You are a village seamstress who has married a duke, and all of London will soon descend upon you like wolves scenting wounded prey." Maribel blinked at the blunt assessment. "You do not waste time with comforting falsehoods, Lady Agatha. At my age, child, time is too precious for falsehoods of any kind." She leaned forward, her bright eyes intent. "Tell me how you came to marry Cassian Greymorn without knowing his true identity." And so Maribel found herself relating the story of their meeting, of the storm-battered stranger who had appeared at her door, of the quiet companionship that had grown between them, of the simple ceremony by the sea that had bound them together, months before the royal guard arrived to reclaim their duke. Lady Agatha listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing until Maribel had finished. Then she nodded once, decisively. A love story, then. How unfashionable, and how desperately needed in these cynical times. "Love?" Maribel echoed, the word catching in her throat. "I did not speak of love, my lady." "You spoke of nothing else," Lady Agatha countered with a knowing smile, though perhaps you did not recognize it by that name. What else would compel a duke to abandon his title and a seamstress to follow him back into a world determined to reject her? Before Maribel could respond, another knock announced the arrival of Madame Laurent, a sharp-featured Frenchwoman who swept into the room with the confidence of one whose skill placed her beyond the normal strictures of class. "Your Grace," she greeted Maribel with a precise curtsy, "it is an honor to serve the new Duchess of Evermere." What followed was a whirlwind of measurements, fabric samples and rapid-fire questions about preferences Maribel had never considered. Did she favor cerulean or sapphire blue? Did she prefer Brussels lace or Valenciennes? Would she commission walking dresses in the latest Parisian style or the more conservative English silhouette? Through it all, Lady Agatha observed with shrewd attention, occasionally intervening when Maribel appeared overwhelmed. "The Duchess will require a complete court wardrobe, Madame Laurent," she declared, "beginning with a presentation gown for tomorrow evening, something that acknowledges tradition while establishing Her Grace's unique presence." "Of course, my lady," the modiste agreed, eyeing the crimson ribbon in Maribel's hair with professional interest. "Perhaps a motif that incorporates this distinctive shade, a subtle thread of continuity, as it were." "Yes," Lady Agatha said approvingly, "exactly so." When the modiste had finally departed, promising to return that afternoon with the first completed gowns, Maribel sank into a chair, exhausted by the unfamiliar social demands. "How am I to remember it all?" she asked. "The proper forms of address, the precedence at table, the intricacies of court presentation. You need not master it all at once," Lady Agatha assured her. "Society will expect you to falter. Indeed, many will hope for it, that they might feast upon your humiliation." Her tone hardened. "What you must never do, child, is allow them to see your fear." "And how does one hide fear from those who can smell it like bloodhounds?" Maribel asked. Lady Agatha's wrinkled face softened with unexpected tenderness. "By remembering that, beneath their silks and jewels, their titles and estates, they are merely people, as frightened in their way as you are in yours. The difference is that you have nothing to lose that truly matters." "I have Cassian," Maribel said quietly, "and his reputation to consider." "His reputation was his to risk when he chose you," Lady Agatha pointed out, "and a wise choice it was. He returned from the sea not just alive, but healed. That healing came through you, not through his title or his wealth." Maribel touched the crimson ribbon woven through her hair, drawing strength from its familiar texture. "What would you have me do then when I face the Queen tomorrow? When I stand before the very society that will judge me unworthy by birth alone?" Lady Agatha rose, crossing to the window that overlooked the formal gardens of Evermere House. Beyond the manicured hedges, London sprawled, a city of power and pageantry, of ancient traditions and ruthless ambitions. "I would have you remember," she said, "that the seamstress who sheltered a broken duke possesses more true nobility than half the painted peacocks who will gather to whisper behind their fans." The older woman turned back, her eyes bright with conviction. "You will enter that court tomorrow not as an interloper, but as the Duchess of Evermere, chosen by its duke, endorsed by his heart, and supported by those wise enough to recognize worth beyond bloodlines." For the first time since leaving their cottage by the sea, Maribel felt the faintest stirring of confidence, not in her ability to navigate the labyrinth of aristocratic society, but in the truth Lady Agatha had recognized that love, whether acknowledged by that name or not, had brought her to this moment. "Now," Lady Agatha said briskly, returning to her chair, "let us begin with the proper forms of address. You must know whom to curtsy to first when multiple royals are present, and how deeply that curtsy should be. As the morning lengthened into afternoon, Maribel absorbed as much as her overwhelmed mind could retain, grateful for the unexpected alliance of this forthright old woman who seemed determined to see her succeed, where so many anticipated, perhaps even hoped for, her failure. Cassian returned to Evermere House as evening shadows stretched across London, his face drawn with the strain of hours spent before the Privy Council. Maribel awaited him in the private sitting room of the ducal suite, transformed by Madame Laurent's skilled hands. The simple day dress of celestial blue silk complemented her dark hair, into which the crimson ribbon had been woven with artful subtlety. "You look—" He paused in the doorway, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Like a duchess." Maribel rose, self-conscious in her finery. "Lady Agatha assures me the transformation is only beginning. Tomorrow I am to be presented at court, and Madame Laurent has created a gown that she claims will silence the most vicious tongues in London." "A worthy ambition," Cassian said, crossing to the sideboard where crystal decanters gleamed in the firelight. He poured a measure of amber liquid, raising the glass in a silent toast before drinking deeply. "Though I fear it will take more than French silk to silence the Privy Council." Maribel studied his face, reading the tension in the set of his jaw, the furrow between his brows. "They were not pleased by your return." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Oh, they expressed appropriate joy that the Duke of Evermere lives, then proceeded to question my sanity, my judgment, and my fitness to resume my duties after my unfortunate ordeal and subsequent impulsive marriage." She flinched at the words, though they were no worse than she had anticipated. "And what did you tell them?" He set down his glass with careful deliberation. "I told them that the sea had indeed claimed Cassian Greymorn as they knew him, the dutiful duke who placed title above heart, who followed the ordained path without question. That man drowned alongside his first wife and child." Maribel's breath caught. "And who returned in his place?" "A man who understands that duty without purpose is merely obligation," Cassian said, his gaze holding hers across the elegant room. "And that purpose, for me, was found in a cottage by the sea, in the hands of a woman who asked nothing of me but that I live." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within her, the part that had recognized the wounded soul beneath the stranger's grief that stormy night at her door. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers as she had done so many times during their quiet months together. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we face the wolves," he replied, his fingers tightening around hers, "beginning with tomorrow's court presentation." Lady Agatha had prepared her for this, had explained the formal procession, the proper depth of curtsy, the precise words of acknowledgement, yet academic preparation felt woefully inadequate for the reality that awaited. "The Queen has granted us a private audience before the formal reception," Cassian continued. "It is both honor and inquisition, Maribel. She wishes to meet the woman who has become Duchess without her prior approval." "Can she?" Maribel hesitated, voicing the fear that had haunted her since their arrival in London. "Can she invalidate our marriage?" "No," he assured her firmly. "Not even the crown can dissolve a lawful union. But her favor, or lack thereof, will determine whether London society embraces you or freezes you in isolation." A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Havelock entered with the evening's correspondence on a silver salver. "Your Graces, forgive the intrusion." These arrived while His Grace was at Westminster. As the housekeeper withdrew, Cassian sorted through the small pile of sealed notes. His expression darkened as he read the topmost letter. "What is it?" Maribel asked, recognizing the shadow that passed over his features, the same that had haunted their cottage when memories overwhelmed him. "An invitation," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "to a memorial service that was planned months ago before my return was known." Maribel understood without needing further explanation. "For your first wife and child." He nodded, setting the card aside with controlled precision. Lady Elaine and Thomas were beloved by many. Their loss was mourned throughout society, not merely by me. The silence that followed was weighted with unspoken grief, his for the family he had lost, hers for the invisible presence that would forever shadow their marriage. Elaine Greymorn, the first Duchess, the proper lady of noble birth, the mother of his heir, would eternally stand as the measure against which Maribel would be found wanting. "We should attend," she said quietly, surprising herself with the words. Cassian's head jerked up. "Maribel, no one would expect—" "Perhaps not," she interrupted gently, "but I would expect it of myself. They were your family, Cassian. I would not have you denied the chance to honor them properly, nor would I hide from the truth of your past." He studied her face in the firelight, as if searching for some hidden motive. "It would be painful for you. Society would watch your every reaction, seeking evidence of jealousy or discomfort." "Let them watch," Maribel said, drawing strength from some wellspring she had not known she possessed. "I am not jealous of a ghost, nor of the love you bore her. That love shaped the man I married, as surely as grief did." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition that transcended the opulent surroundings and the weight of titles between them. For a moment, they were once again the simple couple who had shared quiet companionship in a cottage by the sea. "You continue to astonish me," he said softly. "When I washed ashore, broken and half dead, I believed the sea had taken everything of value. I could not have imagined finding such courage in unlikely harbour." A discreet knock announced the arrival of dinner, served in the intimate dining room adjacent to their suite, rather than the formal grandeur of the main dining hall. As footmen arranged silver covers and crystal glasses, Maribel observed the unconscious ease with which Cassian inhabited this world of servants and ceremony, so different from the man who had split firewood for their cottage hearth. Over the elaborate meal, he briefed her on what to expect at court the following day, the personalities she would encounter, the alliances and animosities that would colour their reception. Lady Agatha had begun this education, but Cassian's insider knowledge revealed layers of complexity that even his godmother had not fully illuminated. "Lady Corvina will likely be present," he warned, naming the village gossip who had first spread whispers about Maribel's hasty marriage. "Her cousin is lady-in-waiting to the Duchess of Sutherland. She will have already poisoned certain wells against you." Maribel's fingers sought the crimson ribbon woven through her hair. "Then we shall encounter those wells prepared." His smile was tinged with both pride and concern. "Remember that you need win only the Queen's approval. The rest may freeze or thaw as they please, but royal favour will ensure you are never openly disrespected." As the evening drew to a close, Maribel found herself facing another unfamiliar ritual, preparing for bed in chambers designed for a duchess, assisted by a lady's maid who regarded her with carefully concealed curiosity. The night rail provided was of finest lawn, embroidered with tiny roses and trimmed with Valenciennes lace, a garment more elaborate than any dress she had owned in her former life. When the maid had finally departed, Maribel stood alone in the vast bedchamber, feeling smaller than she ever had in her cottage. The canopied bed with its damask hangings seemed to belong to another world entirely, a world where the Duke of Evermere slept beside his aristocratic Duchess, not a village seamstress elevated beyond her proper sphere. The door connecting to Cassian's dressing room opened quietly. He entered, similarly transformed by his valet's attentions, his dressing gown of burgundy silk, a far cry from the simple clothes he had worn during their months together. "This feels strange," she admitted, gesturing to encompass the opulent surroundings. "Like a play where we have been cast in roles we never rehearsed." "Does it?" he asked, coming to stand before her. "I find that beneath these trappings, you are still the woman who opened her door to a stranger on a stormy night, and I," his voice softened, "am still the man who found salvation in your quiet strength." He reached out, his fingers brushing the crimson ribbon she had carefully preserved even in her elaborate coiffure. "This is what matters, Maribel. Not the silk, not the title, not the approval of strangers. This ribbon, this symbol of who you truly are, this is what I cherish." In that moment, surrounded by the grandeur of Evermere House, Maribel finally understood what Lady Agatha had recognized that morning. This was indeed love, not the flowery sentiment of romantic novels, but something harder won and more enduring. A love forged in shared solitude, tempered by grief, and now tested by the very society that sought to undermine it. "Tomorrow," she said, taking his hand and leading him toward the imposing bed, "we face the court as Duke and Duchess of Evermere. But tonight, let us simply be Cassian and Maribel, as we were by the sea." His arms encircled her, familiar and safe despite their grand surroundings. "Always," he promised against her hair. "Titles and duties may claim our days, but our nights belong only to ourselves." As candles burned low and London's distant sounds faded into night silence, Maribel found comfort in the one constant amid all the change engulfing her, the steady heartbeat of the man she had married, duke or commoner, titled or nameless. The carriage bearing the ducal crest of Evermere rolled through London streets toward Buckingham Palace, its matched greys stepping with perfect precision. Inside, Maribel sat beside Cassian, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, to disguise their trembling. Madame Laurent's creation, a presentation gown of ivory silk overlaid with silver lace, rustled with each breath she took. "Remember," Cassian said softly as the palace came into view, "you need only be yourself. The Queen values authenticity above all artifice." Maribel touched the crimson ribbon that had been worked into the elaborate silver embroidery at her waist, a subtle touch that Madame Laurent had insisted upon. "I fear myself may be precisely what dismays Her Majesty." "Then Her Majesty would reveal herself less wise than her reputation suggests," Lady Agatha remarked from the opposite seat. The elderly aristocrat had insisted on accompanying them, her own court dress a testament to decades of navigating royal protocol. The crown has weathered far greater scandals than a duke who married for affection rather than advantage. The carriage slowed as it approached the palace gates, joining a procession of similar vehicles disgorging nobles in their court finery. Cassian's hand covered Maribel's, stilling their nervous movement. "We enter together," he said, "as we have faced all else." When their carriage finally reached the entrance, footmen in royal livery opened the door. Cassian descended first, then turned to assist Maribel. As her slippered foot touched the ground, she felt the weight of dozens of curious gazes, aristocrats pausing in their own procession to witness the arrival of the miraculous Duke and his common-born Duchess. "Courage," Lady Agatha murmured behind her. "Chin high, shoulders back, as I taught you." They proceeded through marble hallways, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across polished floors. Courtiers and officials stepped aside, bowing to the Duke of Evermere, while their eyes assessed his Duchess with barely concealed curiosity. A royal chamberlain intercepted them before they reached the main reception hall. "Your Graces, Lady Agatha," he greeted them with precise formality. "Her Majesty awaits you in the blue salon for your private audience." Maribel felt a flutter of panic. Lady Agatha had prepared her extensively for the formal presentation, but this private meeting was an unexpected deviation from protocol. She glanced at Cassian, whose expression revealed nothing to casual observers, but spoke volumes to her practiced eye. He was concerned. They followed the chamberlain through less crowded corridors to a set of blue-lacquered doors guarded by liveried footmen. The doors opened to reveal an intimate salon where a diminutive woman sat in conversation with a silver-haired gentleman whom Maribel recognized with a jolt of dismay. Lord Harrington had somehow preceded them to this private audience. The Queen rose as they entered, and everyone in the room sank into deep bows and curtsies. Maribel followed Lady Agatha's precise example, bending low while keeping her back straight, eyes downcast until the monarch spoke. "Rise, my Lord Duke," came the clear voice of the sovereign. "We are pleased beyond measure to see you return to us when all believed you lost." "Your Majesty is most gracious," Cassian replied, his voice steady despite the unexpected presence of his uncle. "May I present my wife, Maribel Greymorn, Duchess of Evermere?" The Queen's gaze shifted to Maribel, assessing her with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades reading the character of those presented at court. "Come closer, Duchess. Let us look upon the woman who accomplished what all our royal physicians could not, the restoration of a duke we had mourned as dead." Maribel approached as instructed, every lesson Lady Agatha had drilled into her coming to her aid. She curtsied again, less deeply this time, as protocol demanded for a second acknowledgement. "Your Majesty honors me beyond my worth," she said, the carefully rehearsed words flowing more naturally than she had feared. "That remains to be determined," the Queen replied with surprising candor. "Lord Harrington has been sharing his concerns regarding the circumstances of your marriage to our Duke." Maribel's heart sank. Of course Lord Harrington would attempt to poison even this well, to whisper of opportunism and manipulation, to suggest that a common seamstress had somehow ensnared a grief-addled nobleman for advancement. "Your Majesty," Cassian began, his tone sharpening, but the Queen raised a hand to silence him. "We would hear from the Duchess herself," the monarch declared, unvarnished by either your defense or your uncle's concerns. All eyes turned to Maribel. In that moment she understood that her response would determine not just her reception at court, but possibly the very future of her marriage. The Queen had the power, if not to dissolve their union, then to make it untenable within society. Drawing a deep breath, Maribel met the sovereign's gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I cannot speak to Lord Harrington's concerns, for I have never sought his confidence. I can speak only to what I know to be true." The Queen's eyebrow arched slightly at this direct approach. "And what truth would you have us understand, Duchess?" "That I married a man named Alden Greymorn, who came to my door broken in body and spirit," Maribel said, abandoning her rehearsed speech for the simple truth. I knew nothing of dukes or titles or succession. I knew only that before me stood a soul in need of harbour, as my father once described those lost to storm and sorrow. She was conscious of Cassian's stillness beside her, of Lord Harrington's barely suppressed objection, of Lady Agatha's watchful presence, but it was the Queen's steady gaze that anchored her as she continued. We married not for advancement or strategy, but because two lonely souls found unexpected kinship. When I learned his true identity, I offered to step aside rather than complicate his return to duty. Her voice strengthened. It was his choice, not mine, that brought me before your Majesty today. If that choice displeases the crown, the burden falls to him, not to the seamstress who simply opened her door on a stormy night. Silence followed her words, a silence so complete that the ticking of the ornate clock upon the mantelpiece seemed thunderous. The Queen's expression remained unreadable as she turned to Cassian. Is this the unvarnished truth, Your Grace? Did you indeed choose to elevate this woman, knowing the complications it would create for your position? I did, Your Majesty, Cassian answered without hesitation, and would do so again 1,000 times over. Maribel restored not just the Duke of Evermere, but the man beneath the title, a man who had forgotten his own worth beyond the accident of his birth. Lord Harrington stepped forward, unable to contain himself longer. Your Majesty, I must protest. My nephew suffered terrible trauma, the loss of his wife and child, the shipwreck, months of disordered thinking. This marriage was contracted when he was not himself, and yet, the Queen interrupted with surprising sharpness, he appears remarkably sound of mind now, Lord Harrington. One might almost suspect your concern stems less from familial devotion than from reluctance to relinquish the authority you exercised in his absence. The older nobleman blanched, caught off guard by the monarch's perspicacity. Your Majesty misunderstands. We rarely misunderstand, Lord Harrington, though we occasionally permit others to believe we do. The Queen turned back to Maribel, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. You wear a crimson ribbon in your gown. It seems an unusual choice for a court presentation. Maribel's fingers touched the ribbon automatically. It was my mother's, Your Majesty, the only keepsake I have of her. I wear it as remembrance and as courage. Something flickered in the Queen's eyes, a recognition perhaps of the human sentiment beneath the formal occasion. Courage indeed, she said quietly. To step from a seamstress's cottage into a duchess's slippers requires no small measure of it. She rose, signaling the audience was concluding. We shall see you both at the reception. Duke, you will lead your Duchess in the procession, immediately following the royal family. Lady Agatha, we commend your guidance of your goddaughter-in-law. Lord Harrington, her gaze hardened, we suggest you reconsider your position on this matter. The Crown has recognized the Duchess of Evermere. It would be unwise for a subject to persist where we have accepted. The dismissal was unmistakable. As they backed from the royal presence maintaining proper protocol, Maribel caught a glimpse of Lord Harrington's thunderous expression. The Queen's favour might shield her from open hostility, but it had also created a dangerous enemy within her husband's own family. In the antechamber where they awaited the formal reception, Lady Agatha squeezed Maribel's hand in rare physical demonstration. Perfectly done, the older woman whispered. You spoke from the heart rather than from rote memory, and it served you far better than any rehearsed address could have done. Lord Harrington will not forgive this humiliation easily, Cassian warned, his voice low as courtiers milled nearby. He had clearly hoped to convince the Queen that our marriage was the product of mental disturbance, rather than deliberate choice. Let him seethe, Lady Agatha said dismissively. The Queen has publicly acknowledged Maribel. No one, not even your ambitious uncle, will dare challenge that recognition now. Trumpets announced the beginning of the formal reception. Courtiers arranged themselves according to rank and precedence, the Duke and Duchess of Evermere taking their place of honour as directed. Maribel felt the weight of hundreds of eyes as they processed into the magnificent ballroom where the Queen sat upon a dais. The most dangerous moment has passed, Cassian murmured as they took their places. The Queen has accepted you. The rest is merely ceremony. But as Maribel surveyed the glittering assembly, the jewels, the ancient titles, the bloodlines traced to William the Conqueror, she understood that acceptance and belonging were vastly different things. The Queen might have recognized her position, but these proud nobles would require far more convincing that a seamstress deserved to walk among them as equal. As the formal presentations began, Maribel stood beside her husband, the crimson ribbon at her waist a talisman against the subtle scrutiny of England's aristocracy. Whatever storms lay ahead, She had weathered the most critical test. The crown had accepted her as Duchess of Evermere. The rest, as Lady Agatha had taught her, was merely society, and society, unlike the sea that had delivered Cassian to her door, could be navigated with sufficient courage and a steady hand at the tiller. Spring sunlight filtered through the stained glass of St. George's Chapel, casting jewel-toned patterns across assembled mourners dressed in sombre black. The memorial service for Lady Elaine Greymorn and her son, planned months ago when the Duke was also presumed lost, had become an even more complex affair with his miraculous return. Maribel sat beside Cassian in the ducal pew, acutely aware of the contrast between her modest black gown and the elaborate mourning attire of the aristocratic women surrounding them. A month had passed since their presentation at court, a month of careful navigation through London society under Lady Agatha's guidance. The elderly noblewoman had proven an invaluable ally, opening doors that might otherwise have remained firmly closed to the commoner-turned-duchess. Yet nothing had prepared Maribel for this day, for sitting beside her husband as he publicly mourned his first wife and lost child. The chapel was filled with people who had known and loved Lady Elaine, who had celebrated the birth of her son and heir, who had shared Cassian's grief when the sea claimed them both. These same people now watched the new Duchess with carefully concealed curiosity, measuring her against the beloved predecessor whose memory they had gathered to honor. The Archbishop of Canterbury approached the lectern, his voice resonant in the vaulted space as he spoke of lives cut tragically short, of a mother and child reunited in God's embrace. Maribel felt Cassian's hand tighten around hers as the prelate read from Elaine's favorite scripture passages. "The souls of the righteous are in the hand of God," the Archbishop intoned, "and there shall no torment touch them." Beside them sat a silver-haired couple, Elaine's parents, the Earl and Countess of Blackwood, their faces etched with grief, renewed by this public ceremony. They had received Maribel with cool civility when Cassian had presented her, neither rejecting nor embracing the woman who now occupied their daughter's position. As the choir began a hymn that Elaine had particularly loved, Maribel observed a single tear trace its way down Cassian's cheek. Without thinking, she pressed a handkerchief into his hand, not an elaborate lace-edged affair as befitted a duke, but the simple square of fine linen she had embroidered during their cottage days, marked with a tiny crimson thread at one corner. He accepted it with a glance of such raw gratitude that Maribel felt her own eyes fill with tears, not for the woman she had never known, but for the man who had loved and lost her, who carried that grief like a stone beneath his resumed duties and title. When the service concluded, the assembled mourners followed the Archbishop to the memorial garden, where a marble angel had been commissioned in Lady Elaine's likeness, cradling an infant in stone arms. Maribel stood slightly apart, as Cassian placed white roses at the statue's base, his head bowed in silent communion with the wife who had preceded her. "She was much beloved," came a quiet voice at Maribel's side. She turned to find the Countess of Blackwood regarding her with eyes the same shade as her daughter's had been, according to the portrait that hung in Evermere's long gallery. "I believe she must have been," Maribel replied simply. The Countess studied her with the piercing gaze of a mother who had buried her child. "When we first learned of Cassian's remarriage," she said carefully, "we were prepared to despise you, to see you as an opportunist who had taken advantage of his grief and confusion." Maribel met her gaze steadily. "A natural conclusion, my lady. I would likely have thought the same in your position." Something shifted in the older woman's expression, surprise, perhaps, at this candid response. "Yet today I observe something unexpected," she continued. "You do not seek to replace her memory. You honor it alongside him." "How could I do otherwise?" Maribel asked softly. "She was part of the man I came to love, the grief that shaped him, the loss that broke him. To deny her importance would be to deny the very foundations of who he is." The Countess's gloved hand touched Maribel's arm briefly, a gesture so unexpected that several nearby mourners paused in their conversations to observe it. "You are not what we anticipated, Duchess." "I am rarely what anyone anticipates, my lady," Maribel admitted with a faint smile. "It is both my burden and my strength." Their exchange was interrupted as Cassian rejoined them, his composure restored, though his eyes remained shadowed with memory. "Countess," he greeted his former mother-in-law with genuine affection, "thank you for allowing this day to proceed as planned. It means a great deal to have properly honored Elaine and Thomas." "It was necessary," the Countess replied, her own grief evident beneath her dignity, "for all of us who loved them." Her gaze shifted between Cassian and Maribel, assessing the subtle current that connected them even in this place of mourning. Elaine would not have wished you to drown in grief forever, Cassian. She had too generous a heart for such selfishness. With that enigmatic comment, she rejoined her husband, leaving Cassian and Maribel alone amidst the dispersing mourners. Several aristocratic ladies, who had previously avoided the new Duchess, watched this interaction with visible reassessment. The Countess of Blackwood's acceptance, however qualified, altered calculations throughout the social hierarchy. "You spoke with Elaine's mother," Cassian observed as they walked toward the waiting carriage, a feat many considered impossible even before today's ceremony. "She has refused most callers since Elaine's death." "We found common ground," Maribel replied, "in caring for the same man, though in different ways and times." He helped her into the carriage, then sat beside her as footmen closed the door against curious onlookers. "Today was more difficult than I anticipated," he admitted when they were alone. "Not because of grief that has softened with time, but because of memory. Thomas would have been walking now, perhaps even forming his first words." Maribel's heart constricted at the pain in his voice. Throughout their cottage days, he had rarely spoken of his child, the loss too acute for words. That he could speak of Thomas now, however painfully, signaled healing rather than continued rupture. "Tell me about him," she said gently. "Not as the heir to Evermere, but as your son." As the carriage rolled through London streets, Cassian spoke of tiny fingers curled around his own, of first smiles and sleepless nights, of hopes never to be realized. Maribel listened, not as a duchess performing a duty, but as a wife sharing her husband's most private pain. When they reached Evermere House, they found Lady Agatha awaiting them in the blue drawing-room, her face unusually grave. "There you are," she said as they entered. "I've been waiting these 2 hours past with news that cannot be delayed." Cassian frowned, removing his gloves with practiced ease. "What has happened, godmother? You look positively grim." The elderly noblewoman gestured to a newspaper folded on the side table. "Lord Harrington has made his move, it seems. While you were occupied with the memorial service, he was presenting his case to sympathetic ears at White's." Maribel picked up the paper, her stomach sinking as she read the carefully worded but unmistakable insinuations. The article questioned whether the Duke of Evermere had truly recovered from his ordeal, citing sources close to the ducal family, who expressed concern about his hasty remarriage to a woman of obscure origins and limited prospects. "Coward," Cassian muttered, scanning the text over her shoulder. "He dares not challenge the Queen's acceptance directly, so he plants seeds of doubt about my soundness of mind." "It is a cleverly constructed attack," Lady Agatha acknowledged grimly. "He neither explicitly claims you are unfit, nor directly impugns Maribel's character. He merely raises questions that society's gossips will eagerly amplify." Maribel set the paper aside, her hands steady despite the renewed threat. "What purpose does this serve? The Queen has recognized our marriage. The law upholds it. Even Elaine's parents have shown acceptance today." "Purpose?" Lady Agatha's eyebrow arched. "My dear, surely you understand that Lord Harrington had positioned himself as the presumptive guardian of the Evermere estates in Cassian's absence. Had Thomas survived, Harrington would have controlled one of England's greatest fortunes until the boy came of age. With both Cassian and his heir presumed dead, Harrington was maneuvering to have himself declared the next in line. Then Cassian's return ruined those plans," Maribel concluded, the pieces falling into place. "And my presence complicates matters further because you might yet bear the next heir to Evermere," Lady Agatha finished bluntly, "which would permanently end Harrington's aspirations to control the dukedom." A charged silence filled the room. In the month since their arrival in London, neither Maribel nor Cassian had spoken of children, the subject too fraught with the ghost of Thomas, with the weight of succession that had never entered their minds during their simple cottage existence. "So this attack is not merely spite," Cassian said at last, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It is calculated to undermine my position, to question my fitness to manage Evermere, perhaps even to influence the Queen to reconsider her acceptance." "Precisely," Lady Agatha confirmed, "and it will not be the last. Harrington has allies in Parliament, connections throughout society. This is merely the opening salvo in what promises to be a sustained campaign." Maribel touched the crimson ribbon she wore now always at her wrist or throat, her talisman, against the hostile forces that sought to dislodge her from the position she had never sought, but now determined to defend, not for her own sake, but for Cassian's. "Then we must respond with equal calculation," she said, surprising both Cassian and Lady Agatha with her resolute tone. not with denials or protests, which would only lend credence to his insinuations, but with a demonstration of my fitness as Duchess of Evermere. Lady Agatha's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "What do you propose, my dear?" Maribel crossed to the window overlooking the garden, where spring blossoms had begun to unfurl, delicate life emerging after winter's dormancy. "The Duchess of Evermere traditionally hosts a charity benefit each spring, does she not? For the Royal Hospital's Orphan Fund." "Indeed," Cassian confirmed, watching her with growing curiosity. "Elaine organized it during our marriage. It was not held last year, of course, due to—" He hesitated. "Due to circumstances." "Then I shall revive it," Maribel declared, turning to face them both. "Not as a social triumph, but as a demonstration of the Duchess of Evermere fulfilling her proper duties. Let Lord Harrington whisper of my unsuitability, while I visibly perform exactly what is expected of a woman in my position." Lady Agatha's weathered face split into a rare smile of genuine delight. "Brilliant, child. Society may question your origins, but they cannot fault your conduct if you exemplify the very role Harrington claims you cannot fulfill." "It is no small undertaking," Cassian cautioned, though pride had replaced concern in his expression. "The event traditionally draws London's most prominent families. The planning alone requires experience you have not had opportunity to acquire." "Then I shall acquire it," Maribel replied simply. "With Lady Agatha's guidance and your support." She crossed to where he stood, taking his hands in hers with the same direct simplicity that had characterized their cottage days. "I did not seek this position, Cassian, but neither will I be driven from it by whispers and newspaper insinuations. If I am to be Duchess of Evermere, then let me be a duchess your title does not regret." In her words, both Cassian and Lady Agatha heard the echo of the woman who had opened her door to a storm-battered stranger, practical, direct, and possessed of a quiet courage that no aristocratic breeding could have instilled. This was the quality that had drawn Cassian to her, that had healed what the sea had broken, that now rose to meet a challenge as far removed from her former life as London was from their coastal village. "Very well, Duchess," Cassian said, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that somehow combined court formality with genuine tenderness. "Let us show Lord Harrington, and all of London society, what strength truly means." As dusk fell over Evermere House, illuminating the portrait gallery where generations of grey-morn dukes and duchesses gazed from gilded frames, Maribel stood before the empty space where her image would someday hang. The seamstress who had married a grieving stranger now prepared to defend that marriage against forces that had centuries of privilege and power behind them. Lady Agatha found her there, contemplating the blank wall with thoughtful concentration. "Planning your portrait already?" the older woman asked with gentle humor. "Imagining what future generations will see," Maribel replied honestly. "Will they look upon me and see an interloper who married above her station, or will they see a woman who earned her place through something other than birth?" Lady Agatha's gnarled hand rested briefly on Maribel's shoulder. "They will see what you show them, child. Not through protestations or declarations, but through actions that speak louder than Lord Harrington's whispers ever could." With that simple truth to guide her, Maribel turned away from the empty frame that awaited her. The past, both Cassian's and her own, had shaped them, but it was the future they would craft together. One choice at a time, one challenge overcome, one duty fulfilled, not out of obligation, but out of the love that had brought a duke to a seamstress's door and a seamstress to a duke's defense. The grand ballroom of Evermere House blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflected in gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers. Where once dust covers had shrouded furniture during Cassian's absence, now crimson and ivory silk draperies transformed the space into a setting worthy of the most prestigious charity event of the season. Footmen in grey-morn livery stationed themselves at strategic intervals, silver trays balanced with practiced precision. Maribel stood at the entrance, her heart racing beneath the calm exterior she had learned to project during 2 months of intensive preparation. Lady Agatha had guided her through every aspect of planning the Royal Hospital Orphan Fund benefit, from the selection of musicians to the arrangement of flower displays, from the guest list to the menu for the midnight supper. "Breathe, my dear," Lady Agatha murmured beside her, resplendent in dove-grey silk that complemented her silver hair. "You have prepared meticulously. Trust in that preparation." The gown Madame Laurent had created for this critical occasion was her finest work yet, a creation of deep burgundy silk that acknowledged morning's end while establishing Maribel's presence as hostess. The crimson ribbon had been woven into an intricate pattern at the bodice, transformed from humble keepsake to ducal signature. "Is everything in readiness?" Cassian asked, appearing at her side. In formal evening attire, he embodied the aristocratic heritage that had once seemed so foreign to the man she had known in their cottage. "Mrs. Havelock reports the kitchens are prepared, the musicians are tuning their instruments in the anteroom, and the donation ledger is positioned in the entrance hall," Maribel confirmed, mentally reviewing her extensive checklist. "The only unknown remains the guests themselves, and whether they will come." Despite the prestige of the charity and the traditional obligation of society to support it, Lord Harrington's campaign had only intensified in the weeks following the memorial service. More newspaper articles had appeared, each more pointed than the last. Whispers circulated through clubs and drawing rooms, questioning the propriety of a commoner presiding over such an established aristocratic event. "They will come," Cassian assured her with quiet confidence. "If only from curiosity to witness either your triumph or your failure, then we shall give them triumph to discuss," Maribel replied, squaring her shoulders beneath the rich fabric of her gown, "for the children's sake if nothing else." The first carriage rolled up the circular drive precisely at the appointed hour. Maribel took her position beside Cassian at the top of the grand staircase, ready to greet each arrival, with the perfect balance of warmth and dignity Lady Agatha had helped her cultivate. "The Earl and Countess of Blackwood," the majordomo announced. Maribel's breath caught. Elaine's parents had neither accepted nor declined their invitation, a deliberate ambiguity that society would have understood as polite refusal. Yet here they stood, the Countess in subdued elegance, the Earl ramrod straight despite his grief. "Countess, Earl," Cassian greeted them, genuine surprise warming his formal tone. "You honor us with your presence." "The orphans' charity was dear to our daughter's heart," the Countess replied, her gaze moving from Cassian to Maribel with deliberate significance. "We would not see her good works abandoned, regardless of changed circumstances." The message was unmistakable. They had come not merely for charity's sake, but as public endorsement of Maribel's position. By their presence, they countered Lord Harrington's campaign more effectively than any denial could have done. "Thank you," Maribel said simply, meeting the Countess's eyes with genuine gratitude. "Your support means more than I can express." A subtle nod acknowledged her words as the couple moved into the ballroom, making way for the next arrival. The Duke and Duchess of Sutherland. Another surprise, and a significant one. The Duchess was known to be closely aligned with Lady Corvina's social circle, the very group that had first spread rumors about Maribel's suspicious marriage. More carriages arrived, disgorging the cream of London society. Names that Maribel had studied from the peerage books Lady Agatha had assigned took human form before her. Marquesses and countesses, viscounts and baronets, diplomatic representatives and members of Parliament. Each greeted the Duke and Duchess of Evermere with careful courtesy, their curiosity barely concealed beneath polished manners. "Lady Corvina Estmere," the majordomo announced, and Sir Reginald Halford, the woman who had first whispered against Maribel in Fernwick Village, now stood before her, magnificent in peacock blue silk, her eyes calculating beneath her formal smile. The man accompanying her, hawk-faced and coldly assessing, bore a striking resemblance to Lord Harrington. "Your Grace," Lady Corvina curtsied with practiced precision, "how transformed you appear from our village acquaintance." "Lady Corvina," Maribel acknowledged with equal formality. "Welcome to Evermere House. I trust you will find our London hospitality matches that of Fernwick in warmth, if not in intimate knowledge of one's neighbours." The subtle rebuke landed precisely as intended. Lady Corvina's smile froze momentarily before she recovered. "Indeed, Your Grace. One finds society somewhat broader in scope here." As they passed into the ballroom, Cassian murmured, "Sir Reginald is Harrington's cousin and closest ally. Their presence is not coincidental." "They come to witness failure," Maribel replied quietly, maintaining her serene expression as the next guests approached. "We shall disappoint them in that hope, at least." By 9 o'clock, the ballroom brimmed with aristocratic guests, the initial reserve thawing as excellent champagne circulated, and the orchestra played fashionable waltzes. Maribel moved among the company with careful attention to Lady Agatha's coaching, speaking briefly but warmly with each group, ensuring no guest felt neglected while avoiding any conversation long enough to become awkward. "You navigate the sharks with remarkable skill," observed a deep voice behind her. Maribel turned to find Captain Branswick Hart, resplendent in dress uniform, a surprising smile softening his scarred face. "Captain Hart," she greeted him with genuine pleasure. "I had not expected to see you this evening. The Queen suggested my attendance might be appropriate," he replied, lowering his voice. "Her Majesty maintains an interest in the Duke's recovery and in your adaptation to your new position." Understanding dawned. The captain served as the Queen's eyes this evening, his report to determine whether royal favour would continue or wane in the face of Lord Harrington's campaign. "And how do you find the evening progressing, Captain?" Maribel asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I find the Duchess of Evermere perfectly equal to her responsibilities," he answered with surprising candour, "as does the Countess of Blackwood, whose opinion carries significant weight with Her Majesty." Across the room, Lord Harrington had arrived, his late entrance calculated to draw attention. He moved directly to where Sir Reginald and Lady Corvina stood, their heads inclined in conversation that abruptly ceased as he joined them. "Your uncle appears displeased by the evening's success," Captain Hart observed, following Maribel's gaze. "Lord Harrington has never approved of me," she acknowledged without rancour. "I represent an obstacle to his ambitions. A formidable one, it seems." The captain bowed formally. "I shall convey my observations to Her Majesty. I believe they will not disappoint her." As midnight approached, Maribel signalled the majordomo to announce supper. The guests processed to the long gallery where tables had been arranged beneath portraits of grey-morn ancestors. Cassian led her to the head table, where the highest-ranking guests had been seated according to strict protocol. "The donation ledger has received unprecedented contributions," Lady Agatha whispered, as they took their places. Even Harrington was forced to make a show of generosity, lest he appear mean-spirited in comparison to his social inferiors. Maribel glanced to where the ledger lay open in the entrance hall, its pages filled with aristocratic signatures and impressive sums. The orphans would benefit regardless of the social maneuverings that had prompted such generosity, a thought that brought her genuine satisfaction beyond the personal triumph the evening represented. Cassian rose to offer the traditional toast, his glass raised as conversation hushed throughout the gallery. "To the Royal Hospital Orphan Fund, and to the children whose futures we secure through our combined generosity this evening." Glasses lifted in response, the assembled nobility momentarily united in charitable purpose. As Cassian seated himself, his hand found Maribel's beneath the table, a private gesture of support amid the public performance they both maintained. "How you have exceeded all expectations," he murmured for her ears alone. "Even Harrington cannot deny the evening's success." Yet, as the supper progressed, Maribel observed Lord Harrington in deep conversation with several influential peers, his expression animated despite the apparent defeat his faction had suffered. Something in his confidence sent a whisper of unease through her triumph. The Earl of Blackwood approached their table as the final course was being cleared, bending to speak privately to Cassian. "A moment of your time, if you please, Your Grace. In the library, perhaps." Cassian's brow furrowed at the unusual request, but he nodded agreement. "Of course, Earl, if you'll excuse me, my dear," he said to Maribel. "I shall return shortly." As he departed with Elaine's father, Maribel caught Lord Harrington's satisfied smile across the room. The uneasy whisper grew louder. Whatever the Earl wished to discuss privately was somehow connected to Harrington's continued confidence despite the evening's apparent success. "Do not allow your concern to show," Lady Agatha cautioned, observing Maribel's troubled expression. "Whatever game Harrington plays, your duty remains to your guests until the last carriage departs." For another hour, Maribel maintained her composure as hostess, though her anxiety mounted with Cassian's continued absence. When the final guests had been seen off with appropriate expressions of gratitude, she gathered her skirts and moved swiftly toward the library. The door stood ajar, voices carrying into the hallway, Cassian's and the Earl's, joined now by Lord Harrington's sharper tones. "The evidence is irrefutable," Harrington was saying as Maribel approached. "The solicitor confirms it himself in this letter. The succession cannot proceed through irregular channels." "What evidence?" Maribel asked, entering the room without preamble. Three heads turned at her voice, Cassian's face grave, the Earl's apologetic, Lord Harrington's triumphant. "The Duchess joins us," Harrington said with thin-lipped satisfaction. "How appropriate that you should hear this directly, madam, rather than through your husband's inevitably softened explanation." "Harrington," Cassian warned, his voice dangerously quiet, "consider carefully before you proceed." The older man ignored him, his gaze fixed on Maribel with malicious pleasure. "It seems, madam, that your hasty marriage was not merely ill-advised, but technically invalid. The solicitor in your charming village was not, in fact, licensed to perform legal marriages. Your union, while touching in its romantic aspects, holds no legal standing under English law. The ground seemed to shift beneath Maribel's feet, but she maintained her dignity through sheer force of will. If that were true, Lord Harrington, the Queen herself would not have recognized me as Duchess. Her Majesty acted on the information available at the time, Harrington countered smoothly. Information that has now been corrected through proper investigation. Cassian moved to Maribel's side, his arm supporting her though she had not outwardly faltered. What my uncle neglects to mention, he said with controlled fury, is that this discovery comes most conveniently, as you have proven yourself more than equal to the position he hoped to see you fail to occupy. The Earl of Blackwood cleared his throat uncomfortably. I was merely the messenger, Your Grace. When Lord Harrington approached me with this information, I felt it my duty to ensure you heard it in private, rather than in some more public forum. How considerate, Cassian replied, his tone making clear he recognized the Earl had been manipulated, however well-intentioned his actions. And now that you have delivered your message, perhaps you would allow my wife and me some privacy to discuss its implications. When the Earl had departed, clearly relieved to be excused, Cassian turned to his uncle with cold precision. You will leave my house this instant, Harrington. Whatever game you play, whatever evidence you claim to possess, you will not conduct it in the presence of my wife. Your wife? Lord Harrington's eyebrow arched. Did you not understand the solicitor's letter? The woman is not legally your wife at all. The sooner you acknowledge this unfortunate truth, the sooner appropriate arrangements can be made to— To what? Cassian interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. To remove the obstacle to your ambitions. To erase the woman who saved me when all England could not. Leave, uncle, before I forget the bonds of family that have, until now, stayed my hand against your machinations. Something in Cassian's expression, a cold fury that Maribel had never witnessed during their cottage days, caused even Lord Harrington to hesitate. With a stiff bow, he departed, though the satisfaction in his eyes made clear he believed his victory already secured. When they were alone, Cassian turned to Maribel, his anger giving way to concern. Are you all right? No, she answered honestly, removing the crimson ribbon from her hair with trembling fingers. If what he says is true, if our marriage has no legal standing, then everything I have endured these past months has been for nothing. I am neither wife nor duchess, neither commoner nor aristocrat, but something in between with no place in either world. Morning light filtered through the windows of the ducal suite, finding Maribel already awake, her eyes fixed on the canopy above. Cassian sat at the writing desk, correspondence spread before him, his face drawn with the strain of a sleepless night. Harrington's solicitor has been thorough, he said, setting aside another document. The man who performed our marriage ceremony lost his license 3 years ago due to improper record-keeping. Technically under law, no binding marriage took place. Maribel rose, wrapping her dressing gown around herself as she crossed to the window. Beyond the manicured grounds of Evermere House, London continued its bustling existence, indifferent to the private drama unfolding within these walls. What does this mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped her. For us, for Evermere, for everything we have built these past months. Cassian joined her at the window, his reflection appearing beside hers in the leaded glass. It means Harrington believes he has finally found the weapon to remove you from my side. Without a legal marriage, you have no claim to the title of Duchess, no standing in society, no protection against the whispers that would brand you. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Maribel understood. Without the shield of marriage, she would be seen as Cassian's mistress, a fallen woman, a social outcast, a stain on the Greymorn name. Then we must marry again, she said practically, properly, with all legal requirements observed. It is not so simple, Cassian replied, his voice tight with frustration. Harrington has already begun spreading this information throughout society. By nightfall, all of London will know that our marriage was invalid, that the woman who presided as hostess last night has no right to the Evermere name or title. Let them know, Maribel said with sudden fierceness. What matters is what we do next. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Havelock entered, her composure wavering slightly as she announced, Lady Agatha has arrived, Your Grace. She insists upon seeing you both immediately. The elderly aristocrat swept in before Cassian could respond, her face grave beneath her mourning cap. You've heard, then, she said without preamble. Harrington has been quite thorough in distributing his revelation. I've already received 3 notes from so-called friends, eager to inform me of my goddaughter-in-law's unfortunate situation. Maribel's fingers sought the crimson ribbon she had tied at her wrist that morning, her talisman against a world determined to reject her. "What would you advise, Lady Agatha? You have guided me through society's labyrinths thus far." The older woman settled herself in a chair, arranging her skirts with habitual precision. "This situation requires more than social navigation, my dear. It requires a decisive response that silences wagging tongues and secures your position once and for all." "We have discussed remarriage," Cassian said, his hand resting on Maribel's shoulder. "A proper ceremony that meets all legal requirements." "A start, certainly," Lady Agatha agreed, "but insufficient on its own. Any remarriage now will appear as desperate damage control rather than joyful union. You need something more, something that transforms this supposed scandal into triumph." Another knock, more urgent this time. Captain Hart entered without waiting for permission, his military bearing at odds with the unusual breach of protocol. "Forgive the intrusion, your graces, Lady Agatha. I come directly from Buckingham Palace with a message of some urgency." "The Queen has heard," Maribel surmised, her heart sinking. How quickly would royal favour evaporate in the face of this revelation? "Indeed, Her Majesty has been informed of Lord Harrington's discoveries," the captain confirmed, his expression unreadable. "She commands your presence at the palace this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Both of you," he added, his gaze including Maribel. "To what purpose?" Cassian asked, his arm tightening protectively around Maribel's waist. "Her Majesty did not share her intentions with me," Captain Hart replied, "but she was most insistent that the Duchess," he hesitated fractionally over the title, "that Mrs. Greymorn accompany you." When the captain had departed with their assurance of punctual attendance, Maribel turned to Lady Agatha with undisguised anxiety. "What does this mean? Will the Queen publicly withdraw her recognition?" "It is possible," Lady Agatha admitted reluctantly, "though unusual for Her Majesty to involve herself so directly in what might be considered a private matter of law." "This ceased to be private the moment Harrington made it public," Cassian said bitterly. "He has ensured the maximum humiliation for Maribel, regardless of how we proceed." "Perhaps," Lady Agatha mused, her sharp mind visibly turning over possibilities. "Or perhaps he has overplayed his hand in his eagerness to discredit her." The hours until their royal summons passed in tense preparation. Madame Laurent was called to ensure Maribel's appearance would be beyond reproach, while Cassian consulted briefly with the family solicitor regarding options for rectifying their marital status. As their carriage approached Buckingham Palace precisely at 3 o'clock, Maribel gazed out at the passers-by, who remained oblivious to the personal crisis hidden behind her carefully composed exterior. She had tied the crimson ribbon at her throat today, a subtle declaration that, legal status notwithstanding, she remained the same woman who had opened her door to a stranger on a stormy night. "Whatever happens," Cassian said, taking her hand as the palace gates opened to admit their carriage, "remember that no judgment, no law, no social convention can alter what exists between us. You are my wife in every way that matters, title or none." The words steadied her as they were escorted not to the blue salon where they had previously been received, but to a smaller, more private chamber, where the Queen awaited them. To Maribel's surprise, the Archbishop of Canterbury stood beside the monarch, his expression grave but not unkind. "Your Majesty," Cassian and Maribel said in unison, bowing and curtsying respectively. "Rise," the Queen commanded, studying them both with penetrating attention. "We have received most disturbing reports regarding the validity of your marriage, reports which, if accurate, place our previous recognition of the Duchess of Evermere in rather awkward light." "Your Majesty," Cassian began, but the Queen raised a hand to silence him. "We have investigated these claims thoroughly," she continued. "The Archbishop has confirmed that the ceremony performed in Fernwick Village does indeed lack legal standing due to the officiant's revoked license." Maribel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once more, though she maintained her posture with the dignity Lady Agatha had instilled in her. This, then, was the end of her brief tenure as Duchess, the validation of Lord Harrington's campaign against her. "However," the Queen added, her tone shifting subtly, "we find ourselves troubled by the timing and manner in which this information has come to light. It appears to us that certain parties have sought to use a technical irregularity as weapon against a union that has otherwise proven both genuine and beneficial." Hope stirred faintly in Maribel's breast as the monarch's gaze turned directly to her. "You wear a crimson ribbon always, Duchess, or should we say Mrs. Greymorn?" We have observed this consistency since your first appearance at court. What significance does this token hold? Surprised by the question, Maribel's fingers rose instinctively to touch the ribbon at her throat. It was my mother's, Your Majesty, the only keepsake I have of her. I wear it as reminder of who I am, regardless of circumstance. The Queen nodded, as if the answer confirmed some private assessment. And who are you, when stripped of titles and position, when the law declares your marriage void and society turns its collective back? The question hung in the air, weighted with significance beyond mere conversation. Maribel felt Cassian tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm to stay him. I am Maribel Lorne, she answered simply. A seamstress who opened her door to a broken man on a stormy night, a woman who loved without knowing titles or expectations. That remains unchanged, regardless of legal technicalities or society's judgment. For a long moment, the Queen regarded her in silence. Then, to Maribel's astonishment, the monarch's stern countenance softened into something approaching approval. Admirably said. She turned to the Archbishop. Your Grace, we believe this situation calls for exceptional measures. The Duke and Mrs. Greymorn have lived as husband and wife in good faith, believing their union properly solemnized. That this belief was founded on technical error rather than intentional deception should not, in our view, negate the genuine commitment they have demonstrated. The Archbishop nodded gravely. I concur, Your Majesty. The Church recognizes that the intent and consent of the parties are the essence of matrimony, even when formalities may be found wanting. Then we propose an immediate solution, the Queen declared. A new ceremony performed here and now by the Archbishop himself, with ourselves as witness. Such royal validation would supersede any technical irregularity and silence even the most persistent objections. Maribel's breath caught in her throat. The Queen was offering not merely a solution to their legal dilemma, but a public endorsement so powerful that even Lord Harrington could not challenge it. Your Majesty honors us beyond all expectation, Cassian said, his voice steady, though Maribel could feel the emotion vibrating through him. We accept with profound gratitude. What followed seemed almost dreamlike in its solemnity and simplicity. The Archbishop performed the marriage ceremony with dignified brevity, the ancient words echoing in the royal chamber. Cassian and Maribel exchanged vows for the second time, no longer a grieving stranger and a compassionate seamstress, but a duke and his chosen bride, their commitment witnessed by the highest authorities of church and state. When the final blessing had been pronounced, the Queen extended her hand for them both to kiss in turn. Let it be known, she declared, that we have witnessed and sanctioned this union. The Duchess of Evermere holds her title by our express approval, and we shall regard any further questioning of her position as discourtesy to the crown itself. As they departed the palace, a royal messenger was already being dispatched to officially record the ceremony and publish notice of it in the court circular, the most authoritative social record in England. By evening, all of London would know that the Queen herself had intervened to ensure Maribel's position remained unassailable. I believe, Cassian said as they settled into their carriage, a note of wonder in his voice, that we have just witnessed the most effective countermove possible against Harrington's scheme. The Queen's intervention was unexpected, Maribel agreed, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. Why would she involve herself so directly in what could have remained a private legal matter? Because you impressed her, Cassian replied simply. From your first audience, when you spoke honestly rather than reciting rehearsed platitudes, to your handling of the charity benefit, to your response today when directly challenged, you have shown qualities she values above mere birthright. Maribel touched the crimson ribbon at her throat, the humble token that had somehow caught a Queen's attention and approval. Then Lord Harrington's campaign has failed completely. More than failed, Cassian said, a rare smile lighting his features. It has backfired in spectacular fashion. No one in society will dare question your position now that the Queen has so publicly affirmed it. As their carriage rolled through London streets toward Evermere House, Maribel gazed out at the city that had initially seemed so foreign, so hostile to the village seamstress who had dared marry above her station. In the span of a single afternoon, her greatest vulnerability had been transformed into unassailable strength, not through her own maneuvering, but through the simple truth she had maintained throughout, that love, freely given and genuinely returned, transcended title and convention. We are twice married now, she observed softly. Once by the sea that brought you to me, and once by royal decree. Which ceremony, do you think, holds greater meaning? Cassian's answer required no reflection. The first joined two souls seeking harbour in each other's company. The second merely confirmed what was already true in our hearts, whatever the law might say. As Evermere House came into view, its imposing facade no longer intimidating but welcoming, Maribel leaned her head against Cassian's shoulder in a gesture reminiscent of their simpler days. Then let us remember both, the private truth and the public affirmation, and honour each in its time and place. In that moment of quiet understanding, with the weight of scandal lifted and Lord Harrington's machinations thoroughly defeated, the Duke and Duchess of Evermere returned home, no longer the grieving stranger and the compassionate seamstress, but two souls who had found in each other the strength to face whatever storms might yet lie ahead. Autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Maribel's private sitting room at Evermere House, catching the copper and gold threads in the tapestry she was carefully repairing. 1 year had passed since the Queen's intervention had silenced Lord Harrington's campaign against her, a year of gradual but steady acceptance by London society. The crimson ribbon remained at her throat, though now it was matched by a slender gold chain bearing the Greymorn crest in miniature, Cassian's gift on their first anniversary. Both symbols represented chapters of their extraordinary journey, the humble origins she refused to disown, and the noble heritage she had come to share. Lord Harrington had retreated to his country estate shortly after the royal wedding ceremony, his influence in London society markedly diminished by the Queen's public rebuke. Lady Corvina, ever sensitive to shifting winds of favour, had made clumsy overtures of friendship that Maribel had met with polite distance rather than vindictive rejection. Some battles required victory, others merely required grace. "Your Grace," Mrs. Havelock appeared at the doorway, her formal address now carrying genuine respect rather than mere obligation. "Lady Agatha has arrived and awaits you in the blue drawing-room. She mentioned something about final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony." Maribel set aside her needlework carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Havelock. Please inform Lady Agatha I shall join her directly." The housekeeper hesitated, an unusual break in her perfect composure. "If I might be permitted, Your Grace. The staff wishes to express our particular joy regarding tomorrow's occasion. We have taken the liberty of preparing a small gift, which we hope you will accept." Touched by this unexpected gesture from the household that had initially regarded her with such suspicion, Maribel smiled warmly. "That is extraordinarily kind, Mrs. Havelock. Please convey my sincere gratitude to everyone." As the housekeeper withdrew, Maribel moved to the window overlooking the gardens where tomorrow's ceremony would take place. The Royal Hospital Orphan Fund had flourished under her patronage this past year, expanding its mission beyond mere shelter to include education and apprenticeships for the children under its care. Tomorrow's gathering would dedicate a new wing of the hospital, funded largely through Evermere resources and named in memory of Elaine and Thomas Greymorn. The Countess of Blackwood had become an unexpected ally in this endeavour, her initial acceptance at the charity benefit evolving into genuine respect as she observed Maribel's dedication to causes her daughter had championed. The two women would never share the intimacy of mother and daughter, but they had forged a relationship founded on mutual recognition of the love each had borne for different aspects of Cassian Greymorn. "Contemplating your triumph," came Cassian's voice from the doorway. He entered, closing the door behind him, his formal attire suggesting he had just returned from Parliament, where his restored influence had proven significant in recent legislation, benefiting both the aristocracy and the working classes from which Maribel had risen. "Not triumph," she corrected gently, turning to greet him. "Gratitude, perhaps. For how far we have travelled from that stormy night when you appeared at my cottage door." He crossed to her, his fingers brushing the crimson ribbon at her throat with familiar tenderness. "I came seeking oblivion, and found instead a future I could not have imagined." "We have both found unexpected futures," she replied, leaning into his touch. "The seamstress became a duchess. The broken man became whole again." A soft knock interrupted them. Lady Agatha entered without waiting for permission, her advanced age granting privileges few others would dare claim. "There you both are," she said briskly. "We have final arrangements to discuss for tomorrow's dedication, and—" She paused, observing their intimate posture with knowing eyes. "Other matters that require attention, I see." Maribel laughed softly, the easy confidence that had gradually replaced her initial anxiety, now evident in her manner. "Lady Agatha, you have been instrumental in every triumph I have achieved in London society. Surely you can spare your Duke and Duchess a moment of private reflection." "Reflection, indeed," the elderly noblewoman sniffed, though her eyes twinkled with affection. "Well, you have earned it, I suppose. The Queen herself mentioned your success with the Orphan Fund when I attended her last drawing room. A Duchess who understands the responsibility of privilege, she called you." Pride warmed Maribel's heart at this royal endorsement, not for its social value, but for its recognition of the principles she had brought with her from her humble beginnings. The compassion that had once opened her door to a storm-battered stranger now extended to hundreds of children who might otherwise have been forgotten by society. "Come," Cassian said, offering an arm to each woman. "Let us review these final arrangements together, that tomorrow's dedication may honor both the past we acknowledge and the future we build." As they moved through the corridors of Evermere House, Maribel observed how comfortably she now navigated these grand spaces that had once intimidated her. The portraits of Grey-Morn ancestors no longer seemed to judge her unworthiness, but rather to witness the continuing evolution of the family legacy they had built. Her own portrait now hung among them, commissioned by Cassian on the anniversary of the Queen's intervention. The artist had captured not merely her physical likeness, but something of the inner strength that had carried her from village seamstress to Duchess. At her insistence, the crimson ribbon featured prominently at her throat, a visual reminder to future generations that nobility came in many forms. In the blue drawing room, they found not only the plans for tomorrow's ceremony, but an unexpected visitor, Captain Branswick Hart, now promoted to colonel for his distinguished service. "Your Graces, Lady Agatha," he greeted them with a formal bow. "Forgive the unannounced call. I come bearing an official communication from Buckingham Palace regarding tomorrow's dedication." Maribel accepted the sealed document he presented, breaking the royal emblem with careful fingers. As she read the contents, her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. "The Queen intends to attend the ceremony personally," she said, looking up from the letter. "She wishes to see firsthand the work being done in Elaine and Thomas's names." "An extraordinary honor," Lady Agatha declared, visibly impressed despite her decades of navigating royal protocols, "and a final public endorsement of your position that even the most determined detractors cannot ignore." Colonel Hart's scarred face relaxed into a rare smile. "If I might speak freely, Your Grace, Her Majesty has taken particular interest in your journey, a testament to what merit may achieve when given proper opportunity," she remarked to her ladies only yesterday. The rest of the afternoon passed in revised preparations to accommodate this royal visit. Additional security arrangements, protocol adjustments, seating rearrangements to reflect the complex hierarchy of precedence when the sovereign herself attended an event. Through it all, Maribel maintained the calm efficiency that had become her hallmark as Duchess of Evermere, earning approving nods from Lady Agatha, who had taught her so much of this world's unwritten rules. As evening approached, Cassian drew Maribel away from the bustle of preparation to the quiet of the library, the room where, 1 year ago, Lord Harrington had delivered his supposedly devastating revelation about their marriage's invalidity. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small leather-bound volume from his desk drawer. "A gift to mark tomorrow's dedication, though I preferred to give it privately rather than amid the ceremony." Maribel accepted the book, opening it to discover not printed pages but handwritten entries, a journal, she realized, in Cassian's distinctive script. The first entry was dated from the night he had washed ashore near her village, half drowned and wholly broken. "You kept a record?" she asked, touched by this unexpected glimpse into his most private thoughts. "Not initially," he admitted. "I began writing only after we married, after I found in your presence the first peace I had known since the shipwreck. I thought perhaps someday our children might wish to understand how their parents came together across such unlikely circumstances." Children. The word hung between them, weighted with both hope and caution. They had not spoken directly of this possibility during their first year as Duke and Duchess, the ghost of Thomas Grey-Morn still casting subtle shadows over the prospect of new life. "Our children," Maribel repeated softly, her hand moving unconsciously to rest against her abdomen. "I believe they may indeed wish to understand that story, perhaps sooner than you anticipated." Cassian's breath caught as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Maribel, are you saying—" She nodded, joy illuminating her features. "The physician confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you, especially with tomorrow's dedication to Elaine and Thomas approaching." For a moment, he stood perfectly still, emotion rendering him speechless. Then he gathered her into his arms with gentle reverence, as if she had suddenly become infinitely more precious. "You continue to restore what I believed lost forever," he whispered against her hair. Not merely myself, but the future I had abandoned to grief and guilt. We restore it together, she corrected, her hands framing his face. The Duke and the Seamstress, building something neither could have created alone. As twilight deepened outside the library windows, casting long shadows across the room where threat had once become triumph, Maribel felt the full circle of their journey, from storm-lashed cottage to ducal mansion, from strangers to spouses, from loss to renewal. The child growing beneath her heart represented not merely continuation of the Greymorn line, but living proof that love transcended the boundaries society constructed between birth and worth. Tomorrow, a queen would witness their public commitment to the children of strangers. Tonight, they celebrated their private joy for a child of their own, a child who would inherit both a crimson ribbon's humble strength and a ducal crest's ancient privilege. "What shall we name this child?" Cassian mused, his hand gentle against the still flat plane of her abdomen. "Who carries both our worlds within one heart?" "We have months yet to decide," Maribel reminded him with a soft laugh, "though I suspect Lady Agatha will have opinions to share once she learns our news." "As will the entire peerage," he agreed wryly, "though their opinions matter far less than they once did, thanks to your influence on my perspective." As darkness fell completely, they remained in the library, planning not for royal visits or social triumphs, but for the nursery that would soon require preparation, for the future that extended beyond titles and positions to the legacy they would leave for the child who would bridge two worlds, just as Maribel herself had done. Outside Evermere House, London continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the private joy within these ancient walls. Yet something had shifted in the fabric of society itself, a subtle recognition, perhaps, that true nobility resided not merely in bloodlines or birthrights, but in the courage to open one's door on a stormy night, in the strength to rebuild what grief had broken, and in the wisdom to value character above circumstance. The seamstress who had married a grieving stranger had indeed never known he was the Duke all England mourned. But England, in mourning him, had failed to recognize that titles alone could not heal a broken heart. It had taken a woman of humble birth but extraordinary spirit to accomplish what wealth and position could not, to restore not merely the Duke of Evermere, but the man behind the title, and in doing so to transform herself from simple seamstress to a duchess whose worth transcended all conventional measure. In a world that often values titles over character and appearance over substance, the seamstress married a grieving stranger reminds us that true nobility lies not in birth or rank, but in the courage to show compassion when no reward is promised. Maribel's simple act of opening her door to a broken stranger without knowledge of his title or position represents the purest form of human connection, one based on recognition of another's pain rather than their potential value. The story teaches us that healing comes not from retreating into privilege, but from finding authentic human connection across the boundaries society constructs. Cassian found peace not in his ducal mansion among peers who shared his rank, but in a humble cottage where a seamstress saw not his title but his humanity. Perhaps most powerfully, this tale reminds us that we are defined not by the circumstances of our birth or the labels others assign us, but by the choices we make and the love we offer. The crimson ribbon, Maribel's simple token of identity, proves more enduring than all the trappings of aristocracy, precisely because it represents authentic self rather than inherited status. In our own lives, we may never face the dramatic social divides of Victorian England, but we all encounter moments when we must choose between protecting our position and opening ourselves to unexpected connection. May we, like Maribel, have the courage to open our doors during life's storms, and like Cassian, the wisdom to recognize healing when it comes in unexpected forms. Dear listeners, if this tale of a seamstress who healed a duke's broken heart has touched your own, we invite you to join our community of Victorian romance enthusiasts. Subscribe to our channel to receive new stories each week, each one carefully crafted to transport you to an era where love transcended the rigid boundaries of class and circumstance. Did Maribel's courage in facing aristocratic society inspire you? Or perhaps Cassian's journey from grief to love resonated with your own experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which character's journey moved you most deeply, or which moment in the story captured your imagination. For those who wish to support our continuing creation of these immersive Victorian romances, consider becoming a patron. Your contribution helps us research the authentic historical details that bring these tales to life, from the gaslit ballrooms of London to the humble seaside cottages where unexpected love blooms. Until our next journey together through time and heart, we remain yours in storytelling passion. With deepest appreciation, the Victorian Romance Audio Stories team.